So I'm really excited to share this training with you. This is a training I encountered through the Organizing for Mission Network. It was adapted by Bianca Vasquez, who for a long time was a staff member of the Organizing for Mission Network. And she adapted it from training she received from Race Forward. So just want to get those credits in there. I'm calling it, it's not personal, it's a window on structural injustice. So that's what we're gonna do today. And somebody just joined us by phone. Who is this? Can you hear me? All right, mystery person. Okay. So let's just do a quick check-in. When you hear the words structural injustice, what do you think of? Blackjack, I'll invite you first. What do you think of when you hear the word structural injustice?
Well, I think of we don't have a sound foundation. Something is wrong somewhere in the structure. You know, that's the first thing came to my mind.
Okay.
So you could tell me.
Thank you. Would you invite the next person? We'll do mutual invitation here. Just hear from everybody what structural injustice brings to mind. There's no right or wrong answers. Oh, there's John.
Okay, I'll invite Liz.
I guess I think of like injustice that maybe is organized, or that it's built into kind of the system. Is I guess what makes it me. I can't talk. That's what it makes me think of. There we go.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
I'll invite Carl and John.
Well, yeah, for me, I'm sort of where Liz is. When I hear about structural injustice, I think of systems that are in place, hegemony, and it tends to be in my thinking, it has racial underpinnings. It's heteronormative, skewed toward white privilege, those kinds of things. John.
Well, that's what I think. I mean, I think it's structures that have been in place for, since the beginning of our country, for sure, which of course was organized by white men, and it's just like a foundational thing that just goes on generation after generation, pretty much unchecked.
Pick someone.
Oh, Ruth.
Well, everyone took the good answers, which mine are probably the same. It sounds like it would be something related to a foundation or our I don't want to say constitution, because supposedly that would not be unjust, but maybe we're wrong. And maybe Carl's on the structural you would think would certainly include that white privilege and that religious freedom of our founding fathers, I guess.
Thanks, Ruth.
Maybe I don't know who's on the phone, so.
Okay, we've got Bev and I'm assuming maybe Donna, but I don't know the phone number off the top of my head.
Well,
Hear me great.
Say again?
Yeah, it's all the systems in may or may not be fair and just.
All right, I got that. I got Bev saying systems that are not fair, that are unjust. So, yeah, I want to affirm affirm you. Blackjack mentioned a foundation, and I just want you to understand that you do have the foundations. I mean, you've got the intuitions about what this is about. And I hope that this will just build on that and make you even more confident to be able to not only see it, but also recognize it. Cool. Yep. Here we go. All right. So here's what the goal of today is in this training. Yeah, it's a new window on the scripture and the world to take the this structural justice and injustice, both a look at scripture and on our world, and to build on that foundation that you guys already have of seeing it, structural injustice, and imagining what structural love might look like, structural justice. One big practical one is shifting our attention from intentions to outcomes, expanding the imagination that we have for our work as Hope in Action, and really recommit to building power. So here it is, our window on structural injustice and justice. And what I want you to notice is that there are four panes, and they each have a name. We'll go into deeper what each of those mean, but starting at the top left is the interpersonal pane of the window, interpersonal, then intrapersonal, then in the bottom left, institutional or systemic, and in the bottom right, the structural. Okay. So let's dig a little deeper on interpersonal, give you a definition of interpersonal. So at this level, love and harm are happening between individual people. That's what interpersonal means. Inter is between and personal is people. So this is what's happening in between people. It can happen with words, actions, or inaction. Okay. If we talk about someone being a racist, we're talking about the interpersonal frame here, the interpersonal window. Any questions about interpersonal? Okay. So now let's look at intrapersonal. Intrapersonal, the love and harm, they happen within a person, within individual people. So this is through attitudes, biases, beliefs, and values. Okay. Any questions about that? Okay. And now just looking at the big window again, you know, how much in our national, in the way we talk, most of our attention goes to those upper two panes. You know, you may have heard the phrase implicit bias. That's come up a lot around police shootings of unarmed Black people. That bias is in the intrapersonal. That's something that lives within individual police officers, or within all of us, really. And when we play the who's a racist game, or who is the biggest elitist game, that's an interpersonal kind of a thing to do. And if all we were looking at was those two parts of the window, we'd only see, in this case, we'd just see the mountains in the sky. We'd have no idea that there was a lake or even an ocean underneath that. So let's go a little deeper and look into institutional and systemic. You guys were kind of previewing this. So an institution is a building block of society. and they're often formal. Formal ones include Clinton Middle School, Clinton High School, Jefferson Elementary School, the PTA. Those are all formal institutions. The St. Paul is an institution, and so is the Southeastern Iowa Synod and the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America. Those are all institutions and formal institutions. They can also be informal, like family or marriage. Those are institutions that are informal, but also institutions. So let me just pause and see, do you have any questions about what we're talking about when we say institutions? Any comments? So then let me ask you, let's just throw out some other examples of institutions. And you might even think about institutions that you have some personal experience with. So I'll start with Liz. I want to share what are a couple of institutions you've interacted with recently?
Well, I guess my company, United Healthcare, and what would be another one? Mississippi Mississippi Valley Regional Blood Center was another one.
Okay. Yeah.
For formal, anyway.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Great. Great. Ruth, do you have any institutions you've interacted with recently, or just any other examples of institutions?
I'm not doing a lot of interacting, but
Okay.
certainly the school system, the entire district, Clinton Community School District.
Uh-huh. Have you been reading any news or watching any news?
I have. So I guess I don't know. NBC, an institution. Some
Mhm.
people would argue maybe.
Yep.
I mean, I think about the medical institutions at this point, I guess.
Yeah.
UC1 or wherever you're falling to.
Right. Yep. Yep.
Big institution.
Hospitals and healthcare networks. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. Okay. So are you picking up what an institution is? It's the basic definition, examples. Give me a thumbs up if you're with me. Or Carl, a funny face works too. Got it.
Okay. Am I mutually passing off to someone, or we got it?
Oh, no, yeah. We got it. Thank you. So let's talk about what is a system. So if institution is like a building block, then a system is like when something that's been built out of those building blocks, a whole network of like institutions. So Liz brought up United Healthcare. That is an institution. And there are many other institutions like United Healthcare. There are other health insurance providers. There's the state and federal regulatory, bodies, the departments of whatever that interface with that. There's Liz, you probably know more about this than I do. What other institutions does United Healthcare interact with?
Well, like the pharmacy system, that would be another group. And sometimes we even think of like the vision doctors being different than the medical doctor. I shouldn't say doctors, but healthcare organizations are sometimes broken down by vision and dental and that type of thing. Also, I would say you mentioned government, so like Medicare, Medicaid, those groups.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, and we're talking about schools as well. So the school system is all schools, local school districts, state boards, federal departments, all the laws, policies, and practices that make all that up. So So the system is like the web that any particular node or would be part of. So any questions about that?
Not a question, but I would tell you that Jim's most recent trying to deal with the Iowa unemployment. That's a big system, and it's a bit dysfunctional right now. So.
Yeah. Yep. So now let's just do a little brainstorming. What would the church system include? So if St. Paul Lutheran Church is an institution, what would the larger church system include? And I'll invite Carl and John to share first.
Well, obviously, like the Southeastern Iowa Synod is a subset, and then it moves out to the ELCA, and then all the different organizations under the umbrella of ELCA, World Hunger, social justice, all the different ministries, that kind of thing. And then we're also part of the Lutheran World Federation. So I guess it moves out that way. What else?
Yep.
What have I left out, John?
I don't think so. I don't think anything.
He can talk about QuickStar as being part of a system.
Yeah. So that's great. Let me use that as a jumping off point here. So you've talked about the vertical stuff, all of the Lutheran chain all the way up to the Global Lutheran World Federation. There's also the horizontal connection. So then you would say, well, there's all of the churches, just individual churches who can be Methodist or Baptist or independent. And then their denominational bodies, their larger networks. So you've got the Catholic diocese and the Baptist, districts, or I'm sure what they're called, but plus other things like schools, religious schools, from K-12 up to intermediates. And then there's Christian publishing houses and Christian media outlets, and you might even include all of those as part of the bigger church system. John, tell us more about QuickStar and the larger, it as an institution and the larger systems it is part of.
Well, as an institution, I guess the headquarters being in La Crosse, it's got a huge campus there. I mean, someday I'd love to go see it. Somebody said they took a road trip and couldn't believe how huge the operations were up there. So, and you talked about the vertical thing. Their big thing is vertical integration, because they have their own dairy farms. They make a lot of their own stuff. They have bakeries and so on. So that they have control up and down price-wise. They're not dependent upon, another company to provide them with, let's say, bread. Right. As a system, I suppose that might entail, again, the vertical integration there. They own their own transportation system, convenience transportation, and that is getting the goods out from the main campus there in La Crosse out to Wisconsin and Minnesota and Iowa. So I suppose that would be their system.
Yeah. And you've gotten the vertical piece, and the horizontal piece would also include, if we're talking about the convenience store system, that would include your competitors and their networks and headquarters. That they're, I don't know what kind of laws or larger governing policies there would be, but I'm sure there's laws about grocery stores and like OSHA and food safety requirements and bodies and those kinds of things. They would be part of that larger system as well.
Right, yeah.
Cool. All right. Well, let's Do you feel like you got a handle on a system, what a system is? Yeah, good. Yeah, and just keep in mind that it does have that vertical component where you can zoom in with zoom out uh, in a certain thing, just like you can go from St. Paul to our synod to our church-wide body to the global communion. But then there's also the horizontal piece of all of the other, all the other churches, for example, and there are other things. Plus there's some satellite things that don't immediately come to mind. The church system, for example, would include concepts like the separation of church and state, and nonprofit status, and all the laws at state and federal regulations around that. So here's why this matters: institutions and systems, and it's because of how powerful they are. You might have some paper in your pocket that institutions and systems have given value to. They've given that paper, that dollar bill, that $20 bill, and said this has value, and they stand behind them and give them that value. And then that changes behavior at a massive level. How we interact with that paper is different than how we interact with other paper, and what we do with it, and the patterns and the landscape of society because of that. So there's a lot of power in them. And you can kind of consider institutions and systems infrastructures of love / justice, or of a lack of love and injustice, because they are gatekeepers in a lot of ways. They open doors and they close doors to opportunity and resources for individual people, for whole populations. And when it comes to specifically justice, you guys were referencing this earlier, that there's injustice built into them. And that can be in a couple of different ways. One is some were built simply to benefit the rich, to benefit white people. Others were built explicitly to exclude Black and brown people, working people, and the poor. So basically, in some cases, the injustice is a byproduct. In other cases, it's a core feature. It's the intended purpose. I'll give you an example. The very first police were not public; they were private. Like the Pinkertons, you may have heard of the Pinkertons back in the day, and those grew out of the slave system and the overseers and the slave catchers and all of the enforcement that went around slavery. There's a direct historical line. So built into the DNA of all of the policing system is that history, built to explicitly exclude Black and brown people, and then also turned on working people and the poor. So there's one example of that. Banks, for example, in the banking system were built to benefit the rich and white people. So those are some examples of those two different kinds of injustices built in. Any questions or comments about this piece of the puzzle? Okay. All right. So let's dive into structural. Structural really involves different institutions and systems interacting over generations worth of time. So it zooms out on the scale of time, and it is about how all these different pieces interact. Later on, we'll watch a short video about the wealth gap. And the wealth gap, the reason why there is a wealth gap, between the white, an average white family and an average Black or Latino family, has to do with a lot of different things, including slavery and housing policies and banking and education, and and then when that's compounded over even centuries, that's where we get to the structural level. And when we look at the structural level and even the systemic and institutional, we're looking at outcomes, disparate outcomes. And so it doesn't matter what the intention is, we're shifting that focus from why to what's the difference. So yeah, any questions about the structural piece? Is that clear? Jackie, is you getting a sense of what structural is all about? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Ruth, I saw a furrowed brow.
I guess it makes sense. It's a little more.
It's a little fuzzier.
A little fuzzier, that's right.
Okay. Okay. So why don't we talk a little bit about the difference between intentions and outcomes? So tell me, what's an intention? Jackie, Blackjack, I'll go back to you. What's an intention?
Oh.
Jackie, can you hear me?
Oh, I thought you was talking to Ruth.
Oh, no.
I got a good example of an intention about the system. The intentions, what I'm speaking on is when they gave all, well, not really all Black people, but when they gave people housing, low-income housing, they built the projects, and the intentions were that parents with children could live in an apartment house with low income, but they couldn't have the fathers couldn't live with them. So the intention was to help the families, but all it caused was families to be broken because they went from having two-parent household to one-parent household. And that's why so many people grew up in a broken household, because the fathers couldn't live there because it was just for mothers and their kids.
Mm-hmm.
That was the intention and outcome. But the intention was good, but outcome was not good for a lot of kids growing up. A lot of people growing up because they couldn't have a two-parent household.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good example of the difference between an intention and an outcome. Yep. Anybody else have an example, or even just want to define what the difference between an intention and an outcome?
Yeah, in the schools, or just local laws and such, we had this big shift a while back toward the war on drugs and getting really serious about essentially incarcerating people, the 3 strikes you're out kind of thing. And what it really ended up doing, it was supposed to sort of crack down on people and make them follow the law and scare it into them and eliminate drugs and all that kind of stuff. And instead, it just sort of established a school to prison pipeline, because it was treating every single person the same, even though everyone's different, and they weren't looking into why are these people acting out in the way that they are.
Yeah. Yeah, that's another great example. Thank you. Yeah, so I'm zooming out here to say, you know, when we're looking at the above that middle line, just let me see if I'm going to draw here real fast. Yeah, so right here, above the line, intentions really matter. In my personal life, in my interactions with my wife, with people who are close to me, whether they meant to harm me or not, makes a difference. When we're down here in the institutional or systemic, the structural level, those intentions in the end don't really matter. Or at least they bog us down. If we often get stuck there, and it's a common tactic to kind of derail the conversation, is to say, well, my intentions were good. But even in my personal life, if my son Amos hits me in the eye with a stick, I don't care whether he tried to hit me in the eye with a stick or he didn't, I'm going to take the stick away, right? So that's just when we're operating on looking at the injustices, we're looking at the differences in outcome between rich versus poor or black versus white. Those differences in outcome tell us whether there's an injustice or not. Because in a just world, there would be equal outcomes. Yeah, that's part of why that part matters. Okay, so let's take what we've learned here back to Exodus. So here's our same window, and let me just pause a minute and share this quote with you by Cornel West. Justice is love in the public square. Justice is love in the public square. So if I draw that line again, there's a pretty hard line here. In terms of, oh, hey, Bev, we can see you. Probably 80% of the time when we talk about race or class or gender or, heteronormativity, we're talking about above the line, interpersonal things, bigoted things that somebody might say or do, or a bias that somebody has, the way they were raised, right? But that misses it's kind of like an iceberg. There's a whole submerged thing. We often lack the language to describe that down below. And so an easy way, I think, for us to get into it is to recognize that what love on the interpersonal level is justice on the public level. And above the line, it's personal and private. And below the line, it's public. It's the public square. It's the public arena. So that's what love looks like on that bigger scale. It looks like justice. Okay. So that's how you'll see, just to kind of explain the language that I use going forward. So let's look at the Moses story, the Exodus story, from the point of view of this window. The interpersonal level, an example of a lack of love. Moses saw an Egyptian beating a Hebrew, one of his kinfolk. So obviously that's one person interacting with one other person, that cruelty or violence. But an example of love on that interpersonal level was those midwives who disobeyed the king of Egypt and let the boys live, and specifically let Moses live. So Moses' life depended on somebody who was acting in a loving way on the interpersonal level. On the intrapersonal level, the internal level, a lack of love. You guys talked about this, the complaining that the Israelites did in the wilderness. And this, they're dismissing how hard it was back in Egypt. They are basically saying they'd rather trade away their freedom for their safety, their well-being. So they're failing to really love themselves at a deep level. And that ingrained, it's sort of like you can take the slave out of Egypt, but can you take Egypt out of the slave, right? So that becomes it. Slavery becomes an ingrained thing for the Israelites, where they were even yearning for it. That's an intrapersonal level. An example of love in the Moses story is the midwives. You know, I took a little piece out of that verse about when the midwives let the boys live. It's the reason why they disobeyed the Pharaoh and let the boys live. It's because they feared God. It was their faith, their beliefs, their values about what God wanted, which is internal to them. It certainly had an impact, an external act and an impact, but that's love on an intrapersonal level, for example. Then on the institutional or systemic, does it take the story even a little deeper? So the injustice is that the infanticide is the law from the Pharaoh that says, if it's a boy, kill him, and if it's a girl, she'll live. So just killing Israelite boys. That's an institutional or systemic injustice coming from the king. And an example of justice is, now this is, we didn't talk about this, but the Ten Commandments and the law, the stop at the Mount Sinai is part of the Exodus story. And remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy. Now, I want you to look at this through this lens of justice and recognize that this is a labor law. This may be our first labor laws, that you shouldn't do any work, and not just you, but also your servants, your livestock, the strangers who live in your towns. So here's God's desire and the way that the community then lived to make a space where people didn't have to work 24/7. So there's an example of justice that's institutional and systemic. That's in the Exodus story. And then on the structural level, it's slavery itself. You know, we know from slavery in our own history that didn't just happen overnight. There was many institutions working together over a long period of time that created slavery and helped to make it what it was, you know. And so the same is true for them back then. And the justice on the structural level was their liberation, was being set free from Egypt. So there's just some more examples to kind of give us hopefully a deeper sense of this window and how we can see with it, both in the scriptures. So any questions or any thoughts? What came up for you as we walked through Exodus really quickly using this window? Bev, I'll invite you to share. Bev, you're muted. We can't hear you.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
When I was listening on the phone, I was trying to picture all of this and how it came together, but wow, this is really I like this whole idea of the way you've got it set up. It's a structure about structure. It's very visual, and yeah, everything is, there is a structure, whether we see it or we don't. Yeah, that's all I have to say for now.
Yeah, thanks, Bev. Yeah, Bev was saying whether we see it or whether we don't. You know, often we don't see the systems and structures, and often that's because they're working for us and not against us. So, yeah. Any questions or other thoughts about this window onto Exodus?
We're not
This one-
living in the time of Exodus. Sorry, Liz.
Go ahead.
You want to go first? But when you're talking about institutions that are putting things in place to protect us, and either you look at it as the intention and outcome, or you look at it as we're a little like the Egyptians, aren't we? Or the Israelites, because we are not liking. Many people are becoming railing, feeling as though they're being imprisoned, but yet we all know that it's only, I don't believe that there's some, that they're trying to destroy the economy. That may, I don't know. I see some parallels.
Yeah, thank you. Liz?
I was just going to mention that I guess what kind of popped into my head was the nature versus nurture argument, where, you know, you learn a lot of the stuff. So the institutional stuff, you learn a lot of that. And so that kind of frames your interpersonal and your intrapersonal reactions, or ways you treat yourself and others, actually. So.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So it sounds like you're saying these all interact together.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and like you said, it's the structure that's kind of the base of some of the other stuff that happens.
Yeah. Yeah. Right. That's right. Yeah. For example, you know, racism wouldn't have the power it does without institutions working over a long period of time to give it the power that it has. You know, it would just be a few bigots running around, yeah. All right. Well, yeah, thank you. And Ruth kind of previewed for us. What we're going to do next is kind of take a look at our own world and do just some brainstorming of examples of all of these. Let's do this because I think just it helps us organize our conversation. I'll invite you to share, and we'll use the mutual invitation method. So share and then invite someone next, and feel free to pass or to pass for now, but always invite somebody to speak after you. And let's, Carl, I'll do the scribing. Don't worry about it. And I'll just give me some examples. We'll start with some examples of interpersonal, a lack of love at the interpersonal level. And Blackjack, I'll invite you to share first.
Yeah, we seem to.
Blackjack.
I'm sorry.
He invited Blackjack.
Sorry.
You want to give us an example of a lack of love at the interpersonal level?
Me?
Yes.
Oh, I think just like now that we're going through this coronavirus and everybody hears the stories, the cautions, the precautions that you're supposed to take. And people are not showing that love. Like if you walk in the store without a mask on, you could be protecting yourself, but you also could be protecting other people. And it just shows, it's just a lot of lack of love in this world.
Mm-hmm.
And that really upsets me.
Yep. Yeah, thank you. Would you like to invite the next person? It's a great example.
I'll go ahead and invite Carl. He got something to say.
Am I still in the interpersonal, or am I moving over to the intra?
Interpersonal, but I guess if you've got a burning intrapersonal one, you can share that.
Well, no, I mean, I agree with Blackjack that there's a lot of person to person, just not much love in this whole lockdown situation. And I guess a connection that I see to the intrapersonal is that, you know, a lot of this stuff about my personal liberty is being violated is sort of this belief that's centered around me rather than around, as Jackie mentioned, the common good. Seems to be what we've lost sight of. So. Also, I guess interpersonal in a way, even just the partisanship that exists. It seems just impossible for two groups of people, we won't name them, we know who they are, to have any kind of civil conversation with each other. It's more, well, I can't agree with this if this is what you want, because I can't possibly agree with you. So. I will pass off to Ruth.
Because I didn't have anything coming into my brain, right? Interpersonal, lack of love, right? That's what we're, and they had great examples, and I agree with those. I think even though, and because there's only 2 of us in my household, but when you're crammed together, it's really easy to sometimes have a lack of love, I think. Not all the time, but that can happen. I mean, I think any of us, when you're in a close, tight space, we've talked about that we're fortunate that we don't have to live on top of each other, but I think that we can be kind of cruel to each other, and what Jackie was talking about out in, there's a lot of examples in the news of people just doing horrific things to other people in this time when you'd think we could be more loving. I'll pass to Liz.
I guess when on kind of a separate topic from the COVID, when you first said interpersonal lack of love, I immediately thought of like bullying. And you know, that happens all the time. So I just feel, and that's almost, and that could also, I guess, swing over to the intrapersonal, where a person feels that they're better than someone because, and that's why they're bullying, or maybe they were bullied and that's their way of reacting. And I will pass it on to Bev.
I guess we're kind of going back and forth. I see in the interpersonal, may or may not be a good example, but the competition between companies to get government contracts to do solutions towards the COVID thing. You know, some companies, you know, the pharmaceutical companies versus the research. I mean, everybody's in competition, and I don't, like trying to solve, but for their own, pat on the back. Intrapersonal, the people, at first I thought the government, that we were maybe all working together. And then that was a facade. But the intrapersonal would be, individuals wanting personal gain, like, well, I developed this wonderful thing that's going to help people. And it may be for greed, notoriety, it's all about puff out my chest to make me look good. And I'm the one that solved the world's problems. Just, I don't know. That's all.
Yeah, thank you. Bev, I put competition between companies down below. That there are certainly individuals making decisions in institutions and systems, but there's something about the institutions and systems that lead them to need to compete in the first place. So one of the things we can distinguish in institutions, systems, and structures, the injustice doesn't need people. It produces those outcomes, whether there are good people or bad people, quote unquote, right? You can have a different president, and yet the outcomes are the same for poor people or for Black and brown people. Or you can have a whole new CEO and board of directors, and yet the culture of the company is still one that produces, a higher turnover rate for women, especially in leadership, for example. So that's where, when we're talking about it at that level, the persons and the personalities sort of fade away. They produce the same outcomes no matter who's driving the bus, if that makes any sense. Well, with that, why don't we move on to the institutional, systemic, and structural. Let's do like we did before. We can kind of bounce back and forth between them. So, Blackjack, I'll invite you to share.
The institutional. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, institutional. My take on that institutional is like, I'm still trying to come to grips with it, because just the building block of society. And like, say for instance, like now, they're trying to take away our constitutional rights, that our nation, there has been a structure of our, am I saying this right? Of our society, our nation, broke before any of us have ever been born. And now they're trying to take that away from us. And that institution has got to do with the government. Am I saying this right?
Yeah. I mean, you're working through it.
I'm trying to. But I don't think that's. I don't think that man has the power to. Well, it was a man that gave us the Ten Commandments, but in this day and age, to take what we've all been structured on away, just to make it right for themselves, but make it right for some people and not right for others. That's how I'm gonna put that. And I don't know. I'll pass. Okay. Mixed up.
Can you guys hear me? Yeah, Blackjack, I'll just remind you of an example that you shared earlier, which was how the housing projects and their policies divided families.
Mm-hmm.
That's an example on the institutional / systemic level of injustice.
Oh,
Yep.
okay.
Yep.
Yeah. So I gotta be.
Would you like to invite somebody else to share?
Yes. Ruth.
This is a harder one, but I think about this, the school system for the Clinton schools anyway. The intention, I believe, making it mandatory for all students to participate in learning is a good intention, right? That's continuing learning. However, the reality is, I'm sure there are families where that is nearly impossible. And so what will be the end result for those kids? Will they just fall behind? Will they, and frankly, we all know who the most at-risk families are. If you're low income, your parents are struggling to work and make a living, you're not there to supervise. I don't know. I think, and I've already, I mean, I look at the numbers they show us that Jefferson's are a little bit under everyone else's, I think. And gee, how is that right? I mean, the intention might be good, but the outcome is going to hurt a lot of kids. And I'm going to pass to Bev. I'm passing to you, Bev. Are you with me?
Yeah, it's a hard one. I guess I thought I tried to give an example. I mean, there's a lot of good intentions of people trying to make things better for our current situation. People that are buying the gift cards for the restaurants, people that are trying to remodel their businesses while they're shut down. But there's, it's when we're talking about the packing plants that there's such a high percentage of people coming down with the COVID. I mean, it's the institution. Can you call a packing plant an institution? Or the government is saying, no, you have to keep open, but yet it's at an extreme cost for the individuals working there, their families, and it's a toll on the workers, and typically workers, our specific ethnic groups and those populations. I think it's hitting hard on the expectations of institutions to still keep working despite everything else. I think there's a lot of lack of love and respect towards individuals, families, and it's an ongoing problem. And I think some people are getting hit hard. We're not like, some of us are only living in homes of 1 or 2 people. We've got plenty of places we can self-isolate. Other families just don't have those resources. Is that an example, Pastor? We can't hear you, Pastor.
In many meatpacking plants, there's no paid time off. there's a point system for taking time off for illness, right? There's a pressure to keep working, and you're right. There's a, who are the people who work there, and they are poor and people of color. So that's a great example. And in fact, that one even kind of borders into the structural because of who works there and how is it that poor and people of color work in meatpacking plants. There are big structural forces at work there to determine who has jobs in which they can work from home, has jobs with access to paid time off. That's a whole structural thing.
Can I pass it off to John and Carl?
Well, this is just kind of more of a general comment, but during this pandemic, it's interesting how workers who were maybe before seen as, nothing are now considered essential. When Carl and I were in Kansas, which we were there right when everything started shutting down, the week of St. Patrick's Day, and we were listening to the radio of, BJ's father, our son-in-law, and I remember him jokingly kind of saying that, and I think it was in New Jersey, they were declaring grocery store workers and convenience store workers as essential, and he kind of chuckled, and he thought it was kind of funny, but it's true. Anyway, and of course, truck drivers. I mean, my gosh, if we didn't, and truck drivers are seen as kind of this, kind of like shepherds in the old days, kind of scummy people. But without them, where would we be?
And John, to then take that to the level of justice is what's the compensation like for workers?
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. That's the whole thing. All of a sudden, these people are seen as essential. Although truck drivers make pretty darn good money, but people that are working in like meat packing plants and the grocery store workers and delivery people, UPS people, and so on. All of these people are seen as essential, but is the compensation where it should be?
They're the new heroes, but they're not receiving a heroic salary,
right?
Or benefits. Yeah. So, in the interest of time, I'm going to move on and skip the videos that I have here, but I'll email them out to you later, along with some handouts, along with an article that I just came across today and didn't have a chance to read about how the depression or recession or whatever we're in now is racist. That's an example of it's a systemic structural thing because there's it doesn't require any intention, but it's racist. So I'll send that along to you, and I'm really excited to hear you kind of picking up the pieces. And I think part of what made me want to do this now is because I do think that the coronavirus has opened our eyes to the systems and institutions that have such a huge impact on our lives, even day-to-day lives. We can see it now. And so I wanted to give us that window even more clearly. And before we end, I just want to bring us back to the burning bush. That was Moses's calling. And, for me in my life, encountering this window onto structural injustice and justice was a real calling moment for me. And for Moses, I think it was too, in a really specific way. When we have certain options that the systems and structures offer to us about how we can live in the world. What do we do with this knowledge? I mean, we could continue to be perpetrators and collaborators with unjust institutions and systems and structures. We could simply continue to be the victim of those things. Or we could be the exception. You know, the ones who get it, you know, the ones who have read all the right books about the injustices, the ones who vote the right way, etc. The ones who have Black friends, you know. We could be the cultural interpreters. We could be the low income people, the lower class people who interpret for middle and upper class people what life is really like and how that culture works. We could be the lone Black person in a white church who interprets Black culture for the rest of white people. But both of those options are just individual responses, individual actions. And I think Moses was stuck in that. You know, Moses's big action was to kill the guard and run away and to live on his own. He sort of checked out of Egypt, but that didn't change what was going on in Egypt. But it was at the burning bush where he had a conversion to this third way of being in the world that was about building power, was about organizing, building enough power so that there are pockets, at least pockets in the world where there is justice and equity. And that's what the organizing efforts that we are all about are for, is to like Moses did, not work as individuals. You know, God said to Moses, "I am who I am." And from that encounter with God, he said, "Go and assemble the leaders of Israel." So this is not an individual thing. It's something that involves building relationships with the formal and informal leaders in the people, rallying them all together to pull in the same direction. That's the work that we're doing when we organize. Moses needed a reminder later on. His father-in-law told him, "The task is too heavy for you. You cannot do it alone." And that's what organizing is how we share the load. And we work to create change, not just on the interpersonal level, and not just hearts and minds, but to actually make an impact on the structures and the systems, even if they're on a smaller scale. You know, so for example, the work that we're doing around the bathroom fits into this window, because you know, the way that institutions work is to disinvest, meaning they pull money out of certain neighborhoods because of who lives there. You know, that not investing in keeping the roads up, not investing in the parks. And so we're pushing back and trying to redirect money through the institution of the city to invest in a park. Which is a small way, but a way to create some more justice, so that even while there's like the multi-million-dollar soccer complex, which we know is going to serve, you know, middle and upper class people in Clinton and beyond really well, we've built enough power to turn the tide a little bit, so that there's more justice and more equity on that institutional level. So what I hope for is that this work, this Hope in Action work, this training can be a little bit of a burning bush kind of experience for us. so that we will be, unsettled enough to see the world in a new way, and through these lenses, through this window, and just commit even more deeply to building power as a way to be in the world, so that there's liberation, that liberation happens. So final questions or comments. I've used up more of my time than I intended. We're at about an hour and a half, 90 minutes instead of 60. So any parting thoughts? Here's my question, I guess, specifically, is how do you feel God calling you through what we've learned today, through the Exodus story? And Liz, I'll invite you first.
I couldn't get it to unmute, sorry. For some reason, it wouldn't do the space bar thing for me. I guess it reinforced for me some of the training that I took when I did the week long of, you have to do, you have to do something about things if you want to change them. Because I know that was always the question that was brought up during some of that training was, well, what are you going to do about it? What have you done about it? Have you done anything about it? What's the action that you're going to take, I guess. So I guess it's kind of renewed the fire in me, maybe, I guess, be a way of saying it.
A burning bush.
Do you want me to invite, or are you going?
Please.
Okay. Bev.
I really liked the way you said love and action. That's kind of what I was thinking too. This window is kind of opening my eyes up to, oh my gosh, what is the burning bush telling me? And there have been certain things that I've done intermittently, but I think I need to be more consistent. A takeaway, I know Pastor, you gave us a list of people to keep in contact with. I've had some really good conversations with people on that list, but I still haven't heard back from all the people on my list. So I need to keep checking in with folks. I also need to reach out to individuals that are locked up in their own room of nursing homes. And I've made some masks, and I think I just need to do more. I need to keep loving people, but I really need to do more action. I'll pass that on to Ruth.
Well, I don't know about a burning bush, but I think this is a time where it's really easy to focus on self-preservation and looking inward. And so this is a good reminder to maybe a little ember of, not a burning bush maybe, but we need to continue to have those embers that remind us that what's the point? Yeah, I could preserve myself, but and I kind of want to, but I also think we have to remember there's a bigger picture, right? So that's where I come from, and I'll pass to Carl and John.
Well, I mean, what I've learned from the whole session is I like to, I think I function more in the interpersonal and intrapersonal above the line that you drew. and I guess the older I get, the more I realize that, the institutions and systems that are sometimes almost invisible are almost like chains or even an iron maiden for a lot of people that, how are you going to help get those people out of those chains, So, and I'll pass it on to Carl.
Yeah, I too have the aha today was that how much time I do spend above the line, and I've been doing a lot of reading lately and thinking about the systems and the structures, and one of the things that it seems to me is that not only are these structures kind of hidden and that they just sort of happen without our even thinking about it, but they're also designed in such a way that they will maintain stasis. And so when you question a system or you question an institution, there's automatically going to be sort of a pushback for that. And I think we've seen some of that too. So for me, the challenge is how can I identify some of these structural things, these systemic things, and be that person that can kind of point it out and bring others into some sort of resistance and trying to move forward, or just trying to move anywhere other than, well, off center. Who do we, let's see, we've had Bev, we've had Liz, we've had Ruth. Is Jackie still with us?
We lost Jackie.
So I bounce it to you.
Yeah, thank you. Well, I really appreciate your time today. If we had more time, I would want to do a more in-depth evaluation of our time together. But one thing I do want to remind us of, and maybe we need an even bigger window to show the bigger frame, is to go back to the Exodus story and remember all the ways that God acted. And God's initiative was involved. And to really, that this is a spiritual journey, that this is one stop on. And as we are looking for the path forward, these kind of trainings are helpful. And so is, taking these things to God in prayer and looking for how God is already at work in the world and in the people around us to do the liberation, the below the line liberation. So thank you for your being here, participating in this training.